Good morning. This is history for April 6th, Monday, year 2020. And we're going to be reading lesson 58. The date is April 1st, 1939. So we've been talking about Germany, which is across the sea right here, World War II. And now we're going to be talking about Spain a little bit. So let's read. The Spanish Civil War and the rise of Franco's fun to say, Francisco. While the Holocaust was spreading like a deadly disease across Nazi Europe, the majestic country of Spain was suffering under its own problems. In a chaotic chain of events, politics drove the King of Spain to leave his country. This vacancy of power sparked the Spanish Civil War. And this civil war led to the rise of a powerful dictator named Francisco Franco. Here's the story of Spain's unexpected transformation from a monarchy to an authoritarian regime. As a side note, we won't leave this lesson without meeting the famous artist named Pablo Picasso, because he memorialized a harsh scene from the Spanish Civil War with a very unusual painting. So let's back up in time a little bit. When Ferdinand married Isabella in Spain in 1469, they started something big. Their marriage united Aragon and Castile, the largest kingdoms of Spain. And this created most of what Spain is today. They, of course, were the famous Ferdinand and Isabella who sent Christopher Columbus to the New World. We mention this because they were the first in a long line of kings and queens to rule over Spain. In fact, Spain stayed a monarchy for 462 years, which helped preserve rich and colorful Spanish traditions like flamenco dancing and classical Spanish guitar. And there's a picture here, I'll show it to you. See that picture depicting Spain's colorful traditions? After the union of Ferdinand and Isabella, Spain remained a monarchy for 462 years. The stability of this system helped preserve those traditional Spanish dance, flamenco, and music, which relies heavily on the classic Spanish guitar. So that picture is of the classic Spanish guitar. Now, the eventual breakdown of the monarchy was very slow and painful. It collapsed briefly in the 1800s under Isabella II, when the Spanish demanded a more democratic government. The monarchy was restored under the son of Isabella II, but the position was a shaky one. Problems rose up again under Isabella's grandson, who was King Alfonso XIII. Under great pressure, King Alfonso XIII allowed for free elections in 1931 to avoid conflict with Spain's growing movement for democracy. Through these elections, the Spanish voted overwhelmingly for a Republican-style government. With this show of hands, Alfonso gave up on keeping the throne, and he fled the country and remained in exile the rest of his life, although he never actually gave up his official title. In Alfonso's absence, Republican leaders took control of Spain. They held elections for a parliament. We heard that word before, parliament. Well, the Spanish call the parliament Cortes. Cortes. So they wrote a constitution and they appointed the first president of Spain. Unfortunately, it was about this time that the worldwide Great Depression hit Spain. Suffering from poverty, a lot of Spanish citizens were unhappy with the new government and wished Spain would return to a monarchy and bring back the king. This unhappiness led to a great division in Spain between two groups, those who supported the new Republican government, and those who desired a king. Respectively, these groups were called Republicans and monarchists. Now, this lesson would be much easier if we only needed to follow the conflict of those two groups, but the turmoil was far more widespread than that. Each group attracted the following of various other groups. Collectively, the entire conflict grew to follow the political divisions of the left and the right. To keep them straight, I have lined up these various factions in a table for you. A special note to U.S. students, don't be confused by the term Republican. In the United States, Republicans are on the conservative right. In Spain, Republicans are on the liberal left. They are not the same. So, the left-wing Republican government of Spain tried its best to retain control of the nation. In fact, as noted in the table, they later merged with all the groups on the left to form a coalition called the Popular Front. The Popular Front. Groups on the right eventually merged to become the National Front. The National Front. When the Republican-led Popular Front won the next set of elections by a narrow margin, violence erupted across Spain between the left and the right. Among commoners, fighting broke out in the streets. Among politicians, murders and assassinations spiked. The situation in Spain was so out of control that it led to the Spanish Civil War, as it has been remembered. So here's the table I'll try and show you. You can pause to look at it if you want to. So the official beginning of the Spanish Civil War occurred when the right-wing Spanish army declared a revolution against the left-wing Popular Front on July 17, 1936. Their aim was to take over the Republican government and restore stability. What side was the army on? It was on the conservative nationalists, or the right, side. The right chose as its leader Francisco Franco, who at this time was a general in the Spanish army. Franco is so important to the rest of this lesson that we're going to pause from the civil chaos to meet him. Francisco Franco was born into a military family. His original plan was to follow in his father's footsteps and serve in the Spanish Navy. Those plans changed when Spain lost the Spanish-American War and the Navy was diminished. Franco chose the army instead. His talent led him quickly up the ladder of military ranking. He rose from captain to lieutenant, colonel, to the chief of staff. In honor of his high rank, the best man at his wedding was none other than King Alfonso XIII. The wedding was in 1923 when both men were in their 30s and Alfonso was headed toward the throne. I add this fact to our lesson because Franco's close relationship to the king as a friend and a peer would clearly identify Franco as a right-wing monarchist. So, when Alfonso fled Spain and went into exile later on, you would think that Franco might have stepped in to fill the void. That's not what happened. Republican leaders on the left recognized Franco's growing power and felt threatened by it. Consequently, they demoted Franco from being the chief of staff and ordered him off the mainland to a post on the Canary Islands. Far from home, Franco was out of sight of the Spanish people, but not out of mind. As mentioned earlier, the Spanish army turned to Francisco Franco to lead the revolution that essentially started the Civil War. They referred to him as Generalissimo. Generalissimo Franco led a coup that gained him the support of about 40% of the nation. But since the coup did not win the support of the entire nation, some would say it was a failure. Nonetheless, Franco was the hope of the right. banded together as the National Front. Now, politically, some would label Generalissimo Franco a fascist, though he was not a fascist throughout his entire career. He was a member of a fascist party called the Phalange. If you recall, fascism is similar to communism, but differs when it comes to big business. Fascism oversees big business. Communism controls big business. The difference may seem small, but fascist leaders like Hitler and Mussolini were very much against communism. With this in mind, look again at the table of the political divisions of Spain. Who are the communists? Let's look. They're on the left. Where are the fascists? They're on the right. On the premise of fighting communism and anarchy, Generalissimo Franco rallied support from all those on the right, including conservatives, wealthy landowners, and the Roman Catholic Church. Like Hitler, Franco took a stance against communism that appealed to a large portion of the masses. Franco once boasted that he would destroy the city of Madrid before he would allow it to fall to communists. Like Hitler, Franco was confident, persuasive, and full of promises. He claimed to be fighting for Christian civilization. Since I brought up Hitler, you should know that he was impressed with Generalissimo Franco. So was Mussolini. All three men were comfortable with exerting brute force to maintain their fascist-style leadership. Like Hitler, Franco did away with his enemies through imprisonment, death plots, and labor camps. I hate to report that this lesser-known fact, but Franco had his own concentration camps. Hitler so admired Franco-style leadership that he offered Nazi assistance to the right-wing National Front in the Spanish Civil War. One reason he did this was to test out new war tactics and weapons he was creating for the impending war in Europe. World War II had not yet broken out, but it was brewing. With the approval of Franco and the National Front, Hitler chose, for target practice, a Republican-held town in Spain named Guernica. So let's stop briefly to hear the story of Guernica. The small town of Guernica was located in northeast Spain. Monday was a crowded, bustling market day, and knowing this, Hitler chose Monday, April 26, 1937, to test his weapons on the innocent people of Guernica. With the young men of the town away fighting in the Civil War, the majority of shoppers that fateful day were women, children, and the elderly. Experimenting with blitzkrieg-style methods, German warplanes, along with some Italian forces, showered the unsuspecting town with bombs of all shapes and sizes for nearly 4 straight hours. They also shot down visible survivors with bullets. About 1,600 died from direct hits or fire that engulfed the town for 3 full days. One eyewitness said this of the aftermath. Most of Guernica's streets began or ended at the plaza. It was impossible to go down many of them because they were walls of flame. Debris was piled high. I moved round the back of the plaza among survivors. They had the same story to tell: aeroplanes, bullets, bombs, fire. Now that you have this morbid picture of the bombing of Guernica, let's look at how Pablo Picasso, a world-famous artist who was born in Spain, chose to express his shock and grief through a black, white, and blue-gray painting simply titled Guernica. Laced with symbolism, this Cubist-style painting shows an angry bull, an impaled horse, 2 grieving onlookers, a dismembered soldier, a wailing mother with her child, and a person trapped in flames looking up to heaven. Newspaper print appears to cover some of the images because most people, including Picasso, learned of the tragedy by reading the newspaper. Behind the obvious characters portrayed in Guernica, there are layers of hidden images of death, such as harlequins, a human skull, and Hitler's mustache. I have not been able to find the image of Hitler, but it's supposedly somewhere in the middle. Picasso introduced Guernica at the 1937 World's Fair in Paris. It exposed the story of the massacre and has remained a powerful symbol of the horrors of war. A tapestry of the painting actually hangs in the United Nations today. Here's the picture. So the end of the war and the beginning of dictatorship. Getting back to the Spanish Civil War, it raged on for 3 years through numerous battles, thousands of political executions, and the loss of 500,000. Along the way, the left-wing Popular Front gained the support of Mexico, the Soviet Union for 2 years, and the International Brigades, who were voluntary soldiers from 53 nations. The right-wing National Front held the support of Germany, Italy, Portugal, and a band of Irish. Some would say the conflict was a warm-up to World War II. It did involve a lot of nations, but Great Britain, France, and the United States stayed out of the conflict for the most part, unable to support communism on the left or fascism on the right. In political terms, this non-intervention would be called the policy of appeasement. In 1939, 3 final Republican cities fell to Franco and his forces. They were Barcelona, Madrid, and Valencia. With that, left-wing Republican leaders surrendered to Franco and his right-wing forces on April 1st, 1939. And the Spanish Civil War was over. Some mark this date as the beginning of Franco's dictatorship. Others say it started in 1936. Either way, Franco's power was unshakable and set in stone. Soon after the Civil War, he abolished the Cortes, the Spanish parliament, and allowed only one political party. That party was an extension of the fascist Falange Party that merged with others and grew in size. Franco's chosen title under this party was Caudillo, which means leader. When it came to World War II, Spain passed on getting involved. It was too spent and too exhausted from the Civil War to participate, though Hitler and Mussolini did invite Spain in on their side. Franco's regime of 36 years, which was until his death, is difficult to categorize because it was both oppressive and successful. It was oppressive for costing the lives of 100,000 to 200,000 of Franco's political enemies. Flags and other memorabilia of Franco's regime are actually banned in Spain today as a result of the terror that had existed during that time. At the same time, one could say that the regime was successful for being the only fascist-style government to survive World War II. Franco also was successful in restoring prosperity to Spain. Spain had the highest economic growth in the world in the 1950s and 60s. Once growth was accomplished, Franco relaxed on some of his more stifling policies. In fact, Franco so lightened up as a dictator that before he died in 1975, he appointed someone in the royal line of Spain to take his place. That heir was Juan Carlos, the grandson of King Alfonso XIII. In an interesting aftermath to Franco's regime, Juan Carlos I reversed nearly all of Franco's policies. He and his wife, Sophia of Grace in Denmark, restored the Spanish parliament and formed Spain into a well-respected democratic monarchy. It remains so today under their son, Philippe VI, who inherited the throne in 2014. As the King of Spain, Philippe VI also serves as Commander-in-Chief of the Spanish Armed Forces and acts as head of state to publicly represent Spain to the world. All in all, history is on our heels, my friends, and spilling into the present time. we would be wise to pay attention to it.